In this video, we're going to talk about how I created this mixed media illustration using watercolor pencil crayon on watercolor paper. Now, I start off by developing a sketch. You can see here that I start off with something rather rough. I develop that into something a little bit more refined, but it still doesn't have the character I'm looking for. I can see the character in my head, and the face eventually appears, and the body eventually revolves around that. From here, I take that into Photoshop and I've done a few adjustments like adding a shirt collar. What I need to do now is turn this rough drawing into what I call a refined working drawing. A refined working drawing that I can use to transfer to a work surface. You can see here I've taken some tracing paper and I'm just going over the rough sketch, trying to finalize some of the lines here. I'm also putting in some indication as to where the shading will go by putting in some terminal lines here and there. Once I have this refined drawing on a piece of tracing paper like this is my working drawing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer that drawing onto this surface here. This is a mixed media board that allows you to work with both wet media and dry media. Perfect for this mixed media illustration. The reason we don't just draw right onto the artboard is that the oils from our hands and any erasings that we do is going to mar the surface, and that's going to affect our final illustration. We want to leave the surface of our artboard as untouched as possible. I'm going to take this working drawing and I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to get a little bit of drawing chalk. I'm going to embed the surface on the other side of the drawing with this chalk. I'm going to work it in with my fingers. Any excess dust I'm going to collect and remove, but I'm going to work the remaining chalk into the surface so that there is none that is left loose. I'm going to secure my drawing over top of my work surface and I'm going to transfer the drawing just by going over all my lines again. As you can see here, that chalk is only deposited down. Now, let me talk about why I like to use orange chalk. Like Tom Thompson of the group of seven painters, when that color comes through and complements the other colors. That's the reason why I use that red here. Now, I do want to mention something that I'm using terminal lines here to help define where my shadow groupings are going to fall. This is based around the ideas of the principles of form that I cover in another video. In this illustration, you can see how I've used that terminal line to strong effect. In a drawing like this, it's the easiest way for us to decide where our light and shadows are going to fall. Now, I don't put those terminal lines everywhere, however, only a few places where I think it's necessary, such as the face. The nice thing about having a working drawing like this is that if I do need to redo this illustration, I have this working drawing to start from. Now I've got this drawing transferred to my work surface. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to do a color study. A color study is a very small thumbnail, as you see here. I've got my mixed media art pad and I've drawn a very quick thumbnail of this idea. I want to have a backlit light situation. Now let me talk about the colors that I'm going to be using for this illustration. You may be familiar with CMYK offset printing process colors. Offset printing is the way most materials are printed and use CMYK or cyan, magenta, yellow, and black to recreate almost the entire visible color gamut. I'm going to be using those colors in my illustration here. But rather than black, I've replaced that with a blue violet. This is going to be my shadow color. Now I've already prepared the artboard with a little bit of masking tape. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay in a blue wash. Now this first wash is really important. What I'm doing here is I'm thinking about the general lighting situation. I know I want to have a strong rear warm light. as the sun sets on the ocean behind this character, I want the warm light to create a atmospheric specular glow of warm light around the character. It's at this stage here that I want to make sure that I capture that effect. Now, in the top of the sky, I want to make sure that I bring in the magenta. Again, my blue is still wet, so I'm adding it to other areas as well into the shirt. I'm bringing in some of the blue of the ocean behind the character. You can see here a fair amount of pigment segmentation. This is one of the features of watercolor. It's what gives watercolor its distinctive look. Now that the watercolor has dried, I'm going to mix some more of my shadow color, this blue violet. And I'm going to just use this one color and I'm going to paint in all the areas that have shadow. I want to use just this one color to help unify my shadows. The reason I'm using this purple color is that it's the complement of the light color, which in this case is a warm yellow orange. This blue violet will be the perfect shadow complement. As you can see here, I'm not too worried about detail. I want to just lay in a single pass of this blue violet color. You'll notice that this first pass of shadows isn't really that dark at all. I'm going to get darker as I proceed. When that dries, I'm going to again work some more shadows, this time thinking a little bit more about detail. Using that same blue violet shadow color, I'm going to be working in a few more details. You can see here that the form is starting to take shape. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the local color into some of the areas in my painting. So far, I've only painted in the shadow, but here I'm actually going to lay in my local color. The shirt in this case is a strong magenta pink. I painted in some of the flesh color as well here, and now I'm painting in the ocean behind. When all the paint is dry, I've sprayed the surface with this workable fixative. Be careful, it is toxic. Workable fixative brings back a little bit of the workable tooth or texture of the surface. It makes the surface a little bit more gritty, which is perfect for dry media like pencil crayon. I'm using a warm color here to suggest the shadow. I want to keep the shadows fairly warm, as you would expect to see in this sort of lighting situation. And you can see again, like the watercolor shadow pass a little bit earlier, I'm just using this one color to help unify my colors throughout, while also getting in some detail. The colors I'm using here with my pencil crayons also reflect the cyan, magenta, and yellow of my initial color wash. Most of the colors I'm using are variations of those three colors. Here, I'm starting to work in a little bit of the cyan color. Cyan is a wonderful color to bring into your skin tones. Skin tones are best done by combining cool and warm colors together. If you were to only ever use warm colors in your skin tones, the skin will quickly start to look artificial. I particularly love light cyan for that cool color in your skin. Now I'm beginning to work in some warm tones over top of all that. This is called glazing when you start to combine colors over top of each other like this. Now I'm starting to work a little bit of my light tones back in over top of my dark tones. You can do this to some degree with pencil crayons, although there will come a point where the surface will begin to resist working light into dark. When that happens, it's time to get out the gouache paint. You can see here working with these pencil crayons is just a continuing process of glazing color over top of each other, refining those tones from light to dark. Again, I'm bringing in that red color into the shadows of the skin tones, but bringing in this light blue color over top, and then another red color to help unify all that. Finally, with a little bit of the yellow to bring out the highlights. Again, on this arm, exactly the same thing is happening. Starting with the red to help define the form, coming along with the cool blue to help make it look more like skin tone, warm that up, and then bring in your yellow tones over top of that. In fact, I end up working at the shadows a little bit more on that arm. And you can see here that I do a lot of jumping around from area to area. Now at this stage here, I'm building up the shadow by actually going back over top of my pencil crayon with some watercolor. I love doing this because it adds to the richness of the shadows. And now again, a little bit of blue detail into the water. This stage here, I'm actually laying in a little bit more yellow because I felt the glow needed to be a little bit warmer. Now here, I'm using a little bit of gouache in a very small brush, and I'm putting in the highlights. This I feel is one of the most exciting parts of working with an illustration. It really does become a little bit more interesting when the highlights start going in. Now these are my final steps here. I'm taking off the tape, and here is the final illustration. Here you can really start to see how those red lines that are initially put down are still coming through. But Because they're red and not black like graphite, they complement the colors that have been put down afterwards. And there you go. I hope you found that interesting, and I hope this helps you in your own work.